Terminal 1 and the rental car place. Everybody started running out of Terminal 1, out of the rental car place. Some lady was yelling for help.
Now, at this hour, law enforcement officials are not saying specifically what they believe the shooter's motive was, but law enforcement at CNN tonight, investigators are looking into claims that this suspect got into an altercation on board his plane as he was flying from Alaska to Florida. Wolf.
All right, Brian, thank you. Brian Todd reporting. Our CNN correspondent, Boris Sanchez, is at the Fort Lauderdale airport right now. Boris, what are people there telling you?
Well, Wolf, there are hundreds of people here that are stranded because, as you can see behind me, the airport is completely shut down. It forms a loop around the terminals, this driveway here, and there are many people that were either getting off of flights or waiting to get on flights that cannot go anywhere as officials start screening the entirety of this airport. I should note, officials just told us a few moments ago that there was a planned controlled explosion that was set to go off at any moment of a suspicious device, but they haven't given us any specifics as to where that device was found or if it's pertinent even to the shooting earlier here today. To paint a picture of where we are specifically, this is Terminal 2. This is the second level of Terminal 2, the departures. The shooting happened downstairs in the first level in baggage claim. When we first arrived here, it was total chaos. Well, there were people running in all directions, people screaming. I saw families trying to console their children who were crying. And then at one point, we saw several armed officers with large weapons start running into this parking garage here. We heard several people yelling, shouting, running away from it. And that's where we started hearing the rumors that there was perhaps a second shooter. We heard from the Broward County Sheriff earlier who told us that those rumors were unsubstantiated. There's no evidence at all that there was a second shooter or anyone involved with the gunman. The people that I've spoken to here were clearly shaken. You saw the hundreds of people that were on the runway. Not exactly sure what's going to happen to all of them, when they'll finally be able to go home. But one more thing I wanted to point out, Wolf, getting back to that suspicious device that's about to be detonated at any moment off-site of the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood airport. I did ask the Broward County Sheriff if perhaps they were able to identify a vehicle belonging to the shooter here at the airport, and he told me that they hadn't at that time. Of course, that was about an hour ago and just a few moments ago. I'm not sure if you can make it out, but there are still several investigators and officials going through this parking garage. There are several of them here in the center of the airport. As I said, it forms a loop around these parking garages. So it's still a very fluid situation. We're awaiting a press conference from Florida Governor Rick Scott at any moment where we can get more details, Wolf.
Boris Sanchez on the scene for us. We'll get back to you. We'll, of course, await that news conference by the governor. Our justice correspondent, Evan Perez, has been working his sources. He has new information about the suspect. What are you learning, Evan?
A couple months ago, we're told that the suspect showed up at the FBI office in Anchorage, Alaska, which is apparently the last place that authorities have for him, the last place that he lived. He was exhibiting, we're told, signs of mental illness. And he apparently was committed to a mental institution for treatment. And this again happens just a couple months ago before this is the most recent significant interaction that law enforcement has had with him. There's you see a picture of him that we've obtained. This shows the suspect, Esteban Santiago. According to the authorities that we've been talking to, that is the most significant interaction that they have on record with this suspect. There's no major arrests in his record. He did not show up on any radar as perhaps somebody who's has any kind of extremist or radicalization. We're told also, Wolf, that some witnesses who have been interviewed by the investigators have indicated that there might have been some kind of altercation on board this flight. As we reported earlier, and as Brian Todd's piece just mentioned, he arrived at the Fort Lauderdale airport, apparently at that same terminal, on a flight from Alaska earlier today. Once he arrived, he was able to retrieve his luggage, which is where he had the firearm, and then he began shooting. Again, no indication that he was shooting at anyone in particular when he opened fire, according to the authorities. And at this point, we know we've reached out to an employer, a security company in Alaska, to ask about these mental health issues that he may or may not have been exhibiting when he showed up at the FBI office. We're told by the manager of that company, the owner of that company, that they're working with law enforcement at this hour, Wolf, and they could not talk to us and give us any more information at this point.
And Evan, you've been reporting flying with a checked bag that has a gun with ammunition. That's legal, right?
Right, absolutely. He declared the gun. He did everything that is required to fly with this firearm. There's a procedure that they work with TSA. They have specific types of bags that they can use that are locked, and they place a special type of a special kind of tape around it to signify that it has been checked by TSA. Again, the purpose of this regulation is to keep the firearm outside of the main part of the aircraft, so that you can't hijack the plane. Obviously, he checked this firearm inside his luggage, and then once he arrived at his destination in Fort Lauderdale, is where he opened fire and killed these people.
Killed 5 people, injured 8 others. All right, Evan, we'll get back to you. Thank you. With us now, Democratic Senator Bill Nelson of Florida. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. I wish you were under different circumstances, but tell us the latest that you're hearing, because you're well plugged in down at Fort Lauderdale.
Wolf, I talked to the head of the airport and the head of TSA, Admiral Neffinger, several hours ago. So the initial information about the military ID, his name, Admiral Neffinger had given me that, but we still don't know a motive. But he's in custody, so we'll find out what the motive is. And your latest reporting, it sounds like that he is a mental case. Thank goodness it's not a terrorist-inspired case, but we won't know until they interrogate him.
Esteban Santiago, do we know he was? I know he had military ID. Was he active duty?
I don't have that information. It was not at the time I talked to the Admiral. Whether it was an active identification, whether it was someone else's, we didn't know at that time.
Do we know if he was trained here in the United States? Did he serve overseas? Was he trained in shooting, for example, by the U.S. military? What do we know about this guy?
Those are all the questions that the authorities are answering right now as they have him in custody.
This is a very, very serious development. Are you comfortable with the fact that he had a checked weapon with ammunition that he could simply get out of his checked bag at baggage claim at Fort Lauderdale Airport and then take it out and start killing people?
If he's a mental case, of course I'm not comfortable with that he should even have a firearm. But we do have people regularly checking guns, such as hunters that go to Alaska to hunt. They check their hunting rifle and their procedures, as was outlined by your reporter.
When you say a mental case, apparently, according to our reporting from Evan Perez and Brian Todd, he did show up at an FBI office in Alaska, and they concluded he had serious mental problems, and they at least took some steps to deal with that. But he obviously was released, and he decided to get on this Air Canada flight from Alaska to Fort Lauderdale.
If that was an identified problem and that not get transmitted to the fact that he was allowed to take a gun, then that is a chink in the armor right there.
Because when he checked that weapon, there's supposedly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there should have been some record that this is a guy who shouldn't be traveling with a loaded weapon.
Indeed, when you have somebody that's adjudicated with a mental case, that's a red flag right there to keep them away from firearms.
Who's in charge now? The FBI or local authorities, state authorities?
It's my understanding the FBI is leading the investigation, but as you can see from all the excellent coverage that you've had all this afternoon, every law enforcement agency at the local and state and federal level.
There's a lot of confusion still now about a possible second shooter at the airport. We heard from the Broward County Sheriff that they don't think there is, but what can you tell us about that?
And of course, that's something that we always have to be concerned about. And you saw the panic envelop with the shots, the film that you were showing. But we're getting super sensitive to this because, especially in Florida, we had the Pulse nightclub slaughter. And needless to say, these are times that, unfortunately, at airports, you have crowds. It's a soft target. They're all bunched up, either outside the ticket counter or, in this case, outside of baggage claim. It's an easy, soft target That's why, by the way, on the basis of the Belgium shooting last year, we have in the FAA bill double the dog teams, the Viper teams. But you can never have enough dogs with all of the crowds that we're going to have in airports.
Senator Nelson, I want you to stand by. Phil Mudd is joining us, one of our counterterrorism analysts, formerly with the CIA and the FBI. Does the U.S. need to beef up security at these baggage claim departments at various airports? Because anybody can just drive up in front of the baggage claim, go inside with a gun and kill people too.
I'm not sure that's the right answer, Wolf. In any circumstance like this, federal officials have to stand back and do an after action and say, what could we have done on this issue, for example, of whether someone who's been checked in, potentially, if that's actually true, should have checked into a mental institution, should have access to a weapon. On the question you're raising about access to baggage claim, my concern in the 16 years now after 9/11 is that you're looking at targets including nightclubs, cafes, airports, train stations, bus stations, schools. At some point, you've got to defeat this problem in other areas than public spaces. You cannot police the amount of public spaces where we're seeing shootings, I don't think.
Let me, Senator Nelson is still with us. Senator Nelson, are you concerned about security at baggage claim? It's outside the security perimeter. Should it be inside the security perimeter?
Just what your reporter said. Look, seaports, train stations, not only airports outside of security lines, but now we know baggage claim as well. You simply can't have enough security to cover every crowd.
Governor Rick Scott of Florida is coming to the mic now with others from law enforcement. He's going to be making a statement, Senator Nelson. I want to listen to what Governor Scott, he's there in Fort Lauderdale right now. He's got others with him, presumably from the state and the FBI. Let's listen in to Governor Scott.
All right. The first thing I want to tell you is the citizens of Florida will not tolerate senseless acts of evil. You just can't imagine how this ever happened in a state like ours. Think of the innocent lives that are lost. We still, according to the Sheriff's Department, we have five individuals that have lost their life. We still have people fighting for their life in our hospitals. Whoever is responsible will be held accountable to the full extent of the law. So let me repeat this. The state of Florida, the citizens of Florida, law enforcement in this state will not tolerate evil acts. Whoever is accountable to the full extent of the law. I heard about this when I was in Fort Myers. I immediately came over here, got here about 1:45. I've stayed in contact with the Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Israel has done an outstanding job. But the FBI, everybody involved has done an outstanding job. There's been complete coordination between FDLE, the Sheriff's Department, the airport security, all federal agencies. Everybody has worked together. I reached out across the state, not only to our National Guard to make sure they were ready if there's any need for the National Guard, but also airports and sheriffs across the state where our major airports were to make sure whatever resources they need, beside those resources. My heart goes out to every family impacted. The families that lost their loved ones and the family and the individuals that have loved ones still in a hospital fighting for their life. You can't imagine how this could happen to any family anywhere in the world, but clearly we don't ever want this to happen in our great state. I have reached out to President-elect Trump and spoken to him and Vice President-elect Pence multiple times to keep them informed. And they told me whatever resources that we need from the federal government, they would do everything in their power to make that happen. My number one priority right now in Florida is to keep everybody safe. Everybody that lives in our state, everybody that travels to a state, do everything we can to keep them safe. As you know, this is an ongoing investigation. There's a lot of information that law enforcement will put out at the time that they can put that out, and they'll do that as quickly as they can. But I can tell you, everybody is working hard to find out exactly what happened and to hold whoever did this accountable. I don't ever want this to happen again to any family anywhere in the world, but clearly never again in our great state. I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
How did you get
How did I get here? I flew into Executive Airport. I don't believe so. I came here as quickly as I could. Make sure that whatever resources the state needed to provide. The sheriff knew that. The airport knew that. But on top of that, I did that for airports and sheriff's departments across the state. On top of that, talking to our National Guard to make sure they were ready.
What information do you have on the gunman?
This is an ongoing investigation. All that information will be released through the sheriff's department at the appropriate time. Say again, please. We don't have details right now, but that'll be released. Right now, the biggest thing to do is pray for him. When we went through Pulse, the biggest thing is, pray for those, the individuals ended up in the hospital. Pray that every one of them survives. I've not talked to President Obama. No, President Obama has not reached out to me, but I've talked to Vice President Pence and President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence quite a few times. Just keep them informed. I have not.
Do you know if the gunman living through Minneapolis or Anchorage?
This is an ongoing investigation. The Sheriff's Department will release information as quickly as they can.
Did President-elect Trump contact you?
I reached out to President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence.
But you didn't call the president, you called the president-elect.
Absolutely.
Would it be appropriate to call the president for resources?
I have a personal relationship with Vice President Pence and President-elect Trump, and I reached out.
Any other questions? Should there be a ban on weapons in your report?
Look, this is it's horrible what happened here. It's not time to be political. It's a time to mourn those that lost their life, finish the investigation, and pray for everybody that is still fighting for their life.
We'll take one more. Right here, sir. Right here.
Something as far as firearms are concerned, you mentioned Pulse. This is now another incident that we have, a shooting on a large scale. Something you currently obviously have ambitions to work with the Senate. Do you think that something needs to happen both in the state and nationally?
Let's remember, this is a senseless act of evil. We are going to hold whoever did this accountable. It's not time to do politics. It's a time to remember, we have an active investigation, finish the investigation, mourn those that lost their life, and pray for those that are still fighting for their life. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
The Florida Governor, Rick Scott, briefing reporters at the Fort Lauderdale airport on the mass shooting. 5 people killed, 8 others fighting for their life, at least some of them fighting for their life. Right now, 8 others injured. The Florida Senator Bill Nelson is with us. What did you think of the governor's statement?
Well, he said there's an active investigation. He didn't give any details. I'm glad that he reached out to the president-elect and the vice president-elect. Interestingly, I happened to be in the room with Biden, but he was presiding over the receiving of the electoral votes in a joint session in the House of Representatives. I excused myself because that's when I got the word.
It's an awful word indeed. So where do we go from here? I assume they're learning as much as they possibly can about Esteban Santiago, who was the alleged shooter, if you will, the suspect.
If it turns out that he is a mental case, then there's a lot of chain of custody of the weapon and so forth and so on. I think there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing on that. At this point, we see no motive on the material that has been released that he was ISIS-inspired like the Pulse nightclub shooter was.
In Orlando.
59 people lost their lives. Again, a crowded room, lots of people in a small space, replicated in these bunched up crowds at baggage claim or at a ticket count.
Because these are very vulnerable sites, like baggage claim at an airport or the Pulse nightclub in June of last year. Somebody can go in there with a weapon and just start shooting.
Seaports, train stations. Have you seen security at train stations? That would be almost a nightmare to put security in every train station in America. But you have the same kind of thing that But you know what the message is to our fellow Americans? It is, these kind of things are going to happen. Don't let it deter you being a productive American. Don't let these guys get us off our step. We're going to be pushing ahead what America does best.
You saw Governor Scott obviously very, very angry right now about what happened today at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. Senator Nelson, I want you to stay with us. There's more to assess. Phil Mudd is with us right now, our counterterrorism analyst. We have no indication, Phil, that this was terrorism per se, that it was anything related to ISIS or some other terror group. The indications, at least the early indications, this was an individual who had severe mental problems.
That's true, but I think there's a difference between what we assess publicly. I would judge now as a private citizen that the case is going to turn out to be someone who has mental illness and there are no further connections. But as in my former position, I would have a different judgment. That is, I need to know whether he talked to anybody before he got on the plane, whether they're family members or friends, where he talked about acts of violence. I need to know his history on social media. So the initial question I would have is not what my private judgment of a tragedy that we can't explain, but whether we are certain that nobody knew anything before he got on that plane or when he was on that plane. And that'll take a little while, Wolf.
Well, we do know he showed up at the FBI offices in Alaska at one point not that long ago, and they determined he had severe mental problems. They did something, but it still was not enough to prevent him from checking a bag with a weapon and ammunition on this flight to Fort Lauderdale.
Sure, and let me be clear on that. When I worked at the agency, I used to talk to the head of security there about the people who showed up at the front gate of the agency all the time. People who claimed that the CIA implanted stuff in their brains, people who were lost because they were in Northern Virginia and took a wrong right turn. You can't at a federal facility do something about everybody who shows up with a mental problem. I think there's a broader question that Senator Nelson talked about. That is there a conversation about what you do when someone has a weapon and they clearly have signs of mental disease? I think that would be a question going forward.
I want you to stand by, Phil. There's other breaking news we're following. We're going to continue to follow the breaking news out of Florida's Fort Lauderdale Airport, where a gunman opened fire, killing 5 people and sending hundreds of fleeing. 8 people have been injured, some of them now fighting for their lives, according to the Florida Governor, Rick Scott. The suspect is in custody and the airport is closed as authorities sweep the area. We're going to bring you more details as we get them. Stand by for that. But there's more breaking news we're following tonight. A declassified version of the intelligence review on Russia's cyber attacks has now been made public, saying the campaign was ordered directly by President Vladimir Putin. The nation's intelligence chiefs have now briefed Donald Trump, the president-elect, on the election attacks. Let's go to our political reporter, Sarah Murray, who's outside Trump Tower in New York. What are you learning, Sarah?
Well, Wolf, even after meeting with the heads of the nation's top spy agencies, Donald Trump cannot bring himself to blame Russia for these election-related cyber attacks. But as for the intelligence community, they say they have high confidence to interfere in the U.S. election, but that interference was ordered from the highest levels, from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Tonight, after huddling with the nation's top intelligence officials, Donald Trump still isn't ready to point the finger at Russia for election-related cyber hacking. Hours after calling the U.S. intelligence community's assessment that Russia interfered in the election a political witch hunt, Trump was briefed by the heads of the NSA, CIA, FBI, and the Director of National Intelligence. Trump complimented intelligence officials after the meeting, calling it constructive. But he still refused to acknowledge their determination that Russia directed the election-related cyber attacks against political institutions, including the Democratic National Committee. Trump insisting in a statement there was absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election, including the fact that there was no tampering whatsoever with voting machines. This morning, Trump told the New York Times the only reason Democrats care about the hacking is because they got beaten very badly in the election. They are very embarrassed about it. It's true that there's no evidence of issues with voting machines, but the declassified intelligence report on Russia concludes with high confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the efforts to influence the U.S. election. And it finds that those efforts were, in part, designed to benefit Trump. The report states, we also assess Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. It also says, when it appeared to Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win the election, the Russian influence campaign began to focus more on undermining her future presidency. In the run-up to the briefing, Trump and his advisors bristled at the idea that the focus on Russia was anything more than a political attack.
There are those out there who are trying to delegitimize his presidency, review the election results, and you know it.
But Trump insists that he will vigorously battle cyber hacking once in office. After his intelligence briefing, Trump saying, we need to aggressively combat and stop cyber attacks. I will appoint a team to give me a plan within 90 days of taking office. It's not just Trump's opponents in the Democratic Party that are raising the alarm about Russia's cyber hacking efforts. U.S. intelligence officials are openly expressing dismay.
I don't think that we've ever encountered a more aggressive or direct campaign to interfere with our election process than we've seen in this case.
And Republican leaders in Congress say there's little doubt about Russia's role in the cyber hacking.
To meddle in our political system. No two ways about it.
Still, Trump was apparently more concerned Friday with NBC's cyber hacking coverage than with Russia's efforts to interfere in the U.S. election. Trump tweeting, I am asking the chairs of the House and Senate committees to investigate top secret intelligence shared with NBC prior to me seeing it. The president-elect hinting he may be more willing to trust his own officials once he takes office. Members of Trump's incoming team, including his pick for National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, and his choice to lead the CIA, Congressman Mike Pompeo, accompanied him for today's briefing. Trump telling the New York Times, we have great people going into those slots. I expect to have a very, very good relationship with them. Now, in speaking to Donald Trump's advisors, people familiar with his thinking, they say privately he doesn't dispute the notion that cyber hacking occurred, but he does dispute and he is offended by any suggestion that it impacted the outcome of this election or that it is the reason for his victory. One person I spoke to said there's really nothing that intelligence officials could have said to him today that would change his mind and make him believe that Russia was in any way responsible for his victory. Wolf.
Sarah Murray reporting from outside Trump Tower in New York. Sarah, thanks very much. The sources and methods remain secret, but the conclusions in the declassified version of the intelligence review are stunning. Among other things, it says this: we assess with high confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election, the consistent goals of which were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. Let's bring in our justice correspondent, Pamela Brown. Pamela, this report describes Russia's motivations actually shifting a bit over the course of the election campaign in 2016.
That's right. It says that when it became clear to Moscow that the election favored Hillary Clinton, that the Russians ramped up their efforts to undermine her campaign through the disclosure of those hacked emails and as well as the fake news campaign that apparently Russia was behind, according to the U.S. intelligence community. Here's what the report says. It says, when it's called the election favored Hillary Clinton, the report says, we further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump when it appeared in Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win the election. The Russian influence campaign then focused on undermining her expected presidency. Wolf.
So there were multiple objectives, at least two objectives or three objectives. One objective to undermine the faith in the U.S. democratic process. A second, to undermine credibility of Hillary Clinton. And if she was going to be elected, make it more difficult for her if she were going to become president. A third, though, they specifically state, was to try to help Donald Trump get elected.
That's right. And it seems like from reading the report and the view of the U.S. intelligence community, it had to do with more to do with Putin's grudge against the U.S. for what he perceived as efforts to undermine Russia and a grudge against Hillary Clinton. It talked about that, and here's what it says. Putin most likely wanted to discredit Secretary Clinton because he has publicly blamed her since 2011 for inciting mass protests against his regime in late 2011 and early 2012, and because he holds a grudge for comments he almost certainly saw as disparaging him. It also talks about how Moscow saw President-elect Trump, now President-elect Trump, at the time candidate Trump, as a way to achieve an international counterterrorism coalition against ISIS, and that after Trump's victory, Russian media hailed President-elect Trump's victory as a vindication of Putin's advocacy of global populist movements, the theme of Putin's annual conference for Western academics in October 2016, and the latest example of Western liberalism's collapse. And we reported, as you recall, Wolf, last night, there were also intercepted communications that's not in this declassified report, where the Russian government officials were apparently celebrating and congratulating one another after Trump won, according to intelligence officials.
They also explain in this declassified report why high-ranking Russian officials preferred Trump.
That's right. So it talks about the fact that they believe that Trump would be a better partner against ISIS, more favorable to Moscow. And the report says that there was a coordinated effort through these fake news operations, through RT, formerly Russia Today. It talks about how RT was a propaganda arm of the Russian government to push out negative news about Hillary Clinton and more favorable news about Donald Trump.
The report also warns that Russia can fully be expected to do more of this down the road.
That's right. Well, it talked about sort of this gradual increase in Russian efforts during elections. It talks about how in past years it would steal emails and just gather intelligence, and then it escalated those efforts during this past election. And it says expect more of the same by this information warfare, if you want to call it that we saw during the election. It says Russia will be doing the same through spear phishing campaigns with fake news operations. It says we assess Moscow will apply lessons learned from its campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election to future influence efforts in the United States and worldwide, including against U.S. allies in their election processes. We assess the Russian intelligence services would have seen their election influence campaign as at least a qualified success because of their perceived ability to impact public discussion. But important to point out here again and reiterate, there's no indication that the Russians were able to tamper with any vote tallies, but it's clear they felt like they had a victory with influencing public perception, perhaps.
That's what their conclusion was. No indication that voting machines were actually tampered with, but they do have all these other conclusions. Pamela Brown, thanks very much. Joining us now is Leon Panetta. He served as the CIA director and the defense secretary in the Obama administration. He was also the White House chief of staff for President Clinton, spent nearly 2 decades in Congress as well. Secretary Panetta, thanks very much for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Wolf.
What is your initial reaction to the information contained in this declassified version of the Russian hacking review?
Well, it pretty much confirms what Jim Clapper testified to before the Armed Services Committee yesterday, that they have a clear ironclad evidence that the Russians were involved in trying to interfere with our election system, and that they were taking an unprecedented and aggressive stance to try to influence our election. That's the bottom line, and that's what all of us ought to be concerned about.
I want to read to you part of a statement from President-elect Trump released today about his meeting with the key intelligence chiefs. While Russia, China, other countries, outside groups, and people are consistently trying to break through the cyber infrastructure of our governmental institutions, businesses, and organizations, including the Democratic National Committee, there was absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election, including the fact whatsoever with voting machines. There were attempts to hack the Republican National Committee, but the RNC had strong hacking defenses, and the hackers were unsuccessful. From that statement, Secretary Panetta, does it seem to you that Trump is still primarily concerned about the election, about his election being perceived potentially as not all that legitimate given Russian involvement?
You know, Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. He's going to be sworn in as our 45th president. There's no question that that's going to happen. But as the president-elect and as the future president of the United States, he's got to be very concerned about a country like Russia kind of aggressive effort to interfere in our election. And I think that's the one thing in the statement that he should have acknowledged, that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we are not going to tolerate Russia trying to interfere in our election process. That is unacceptable, and we have to do everything possible to stop it happening in the future.
Earlier in the day, before his briefing from the intelligence community's leadership, he suggested that the intelligence agencies were actually involved in what he called the political witch hunt against him. In that brief interview, he granted a phone interview to the New York Times. Do you believe the relationship between the president-elect and the intelligence community, and you're a former director of the CIA, can be mended?
I pray that we get beyond this bickering and tweeting with regards to the intelligence community. And his statement today at least was a step in the right direction. He talked about having a constructive meeting. He indicated he had tremendous respect for the men and women in our intelligence community. And he also indicated that he would appoint a team to make sure that we protect ourselves from cyber attacks. So I hope that he's moving in the right direction. President of the United States, his first duty is to protect this country. And there is no way that a president can protect this country without having a trusting relationship with the intelligence community. He needs to have good intelligence in order to be able to defend this country.
In a separate tweet, Mr. Secretary, the president-elect said he wants NBC News investigated because they reported on some of the classified briefings that President Obama received yesterday, which is raising questions about his priorities right now. Well, what was your reaction to that?
You know, as a former chief of staff, I just can't imagine how you deal with a president who feels free to tweet every day about his own emotions and personal feelings. It is very disruptive, and it creates tremendous problems in terms of the ability for a president to be able to guide policy in this country. A president ought to be thoughtfully considering be taken, talk with his advisors, consider the steps and the words he's going to use as president. Because if you just have someone who's going to tweet his most recent emotions to the American people, I think we're going to be in for a very rough ride with this new president.
Do you worry that a weak response from the president-elect after he takes office, or even a reversal of some of the sanctions imposed against the Russians by President Obama in recent weeks, do you fear that that could encourage other foreign actors to conduct more cyber attacks on the U.S., including more serious ones on the electoral system? In other words, actually going in and trying to hamper the vote tallies?
I think the bickering that we've seen going on with regards to the intelligence dealing with Russia and the questioning of the intelligence on that issue has in some ways damaged our national security because it sent a message to enemies that somehow they can conduct these kinds of attacks on the United States and not pay a price for it. And that has to be very clear that we are not going to tolerate that. Secondly, it's impacted on the credibility and impacted on the morale of the men and women who serve in our intelligence community. These are good patriots who are trying to do the right thing, trying to do their job in presenting the best intelligence to the president. When the quality of that intelligence is questioned, it begins to undermine the relationship between the president and the intelligence community. So I hope that this president will take steps to try to mend those problems because it relates to our national security.
Was the Obama administration, Mr. Secretary, too slow in responding to the Russian cyber attacks. I raised the question with you because Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein, the senator from your home state of California, she was until recently the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. They both complained that the Obama administration should have reacted much more forcefully even during the election campaign. Your reaction?
Well, I agree with that, Wolf. I agree with Adam Schiff and Dianne Feinstein and others who believe that the president should have acted earlier, because once there was clear evidence that the Russians were engaged in this kind of deliberate effort to try to interfere with our election process in our country, this is unacceptable. And it is very important for the President of the United States not only to make clear that it's unacceptable, but to take action to make very clear to them that it is unacceptable. So I would have preferred that he would have acted earlier. I'm glad that he did act. I'm glad he took action with regards to our diplomats, and hopefully he's taken additional steps to try to make clear to the Russians that we will not tolerate this kind of behavior. Look, we're dealing with a country that's going to continue to try to destabilize the United States. President Trump needs to understand that Russia is no friend. They're going to continue to try to destabilize our country. We know that from the intelligence we've seen. He's going to have to take action to make sure that they do not do that. And that's what's important if we're going to be able to deal with them in the future.
Leon Panetta, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
We're standing by to hear from Sean Spicer. He's the incoming White House press secretary for President-elect Donald Trump. We'll have that live interview. That's coming up. We're also following the breaking news out of Florida's Fort Lauderdale airport, where a gunman opened fire today, killing 5 people, injuring at least 8 others, some of them now, according to the Florida governor, fighting for their lives, sending hundreds of people fleeing. The suspect is in custody. The airport is closed as authorities sweep the area. But we're also following the other breaking story. Donald Trump has now been briefed by the intelligence community leadership as a declassified report has been released today on Russia's attempt to try to sway the U.S. election. Let's bring in our experts, and Evan Perez, our CNN Justice correspondent, the highlights of this newly released report. This is declassified. This report, it's lengthy. I've gone through the whole thing. It is pretty amazing when you see what they're saying in the declassified version. You can only imagine what's in the classified version.
Right. We know that the classified version, which members of Congress have now been able to see this afternoon, the President-elect Donald Trump was able to get briefed on personally by the 4 top intelligence officials of the United States earlier today. Wolf, we know that it contains significant information, not only including how they were able to put together a picture of the Russian intelligence agencies taking the information that they had hacked from these Democratic Party organizations and then provide it to WikiLeaks and other organizations that were publishing it over the last few months. We know that they go into greater detail, providing that kind of proof to the lawmakers. And you might have noticed that some of the statements that have come out today have essentially backed off of all of the doubts about giving us more proof, give us more proof. I think now some of those officials have now seen some of the proof. And one of the things that I found remarkable about the report is it goes into some of the reasonings behind why Vladimir Putin preferred Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton and his beefs essentially with the United States, including his view that the Panama Papers, these documents that showed where Russian oligarchs were hiding their money all over the world, Wolf, that he viewed that as something that the United States had done to embarrass Russia, that the report that showed Russian athletes were doping during recent Olympics, that was done by the United States to embarrass Russia. He seemed to be trying to hit back at the United States because of that.
David Axelrod, in this report, what jumped out at you?
Well, I mean, in a sense, it was stark in the sense that all the details were put together. It did confirm what we've been hearing for some time, and it underscored the fact that this was a kind of audacious assault on our sovereignty and our democracy. It's bewildering as to why Mr. Trump can't set aside his own concerns here and recognize that this is serious business. He's president of the United States. I think, he's had some scores during this transition period in terms of dealing with corporations and some other issues. This is a big blemish, and he needs to move out of this. He needs to get out of this fight with the intel community and this peculiar affinity for Russia, or he is, I think, going to run into big political problems with his own party as well as the Democratic Party.
We're going to be getting his view from his incoming White House press secretary, Sean Spicer. We're going to be speaking with him fairly soon. We'll get that perspective as well. Phil Mudd used to work at the CIA. What jumped out at you?
Two words in there. The level of confidence, when they talk about high confidence, is remarkable for an intelligence professional. Let me tell you why. In the post-WMD environment, after the WMD debacle in Iraq, the intelligence community went through a process to be sure when they spoke on issues like this, they distinguished between what they thought and what they were highly confident of. After that searing experience, when I see something of this magnitude on domestic politics in a presidential election in the United States, and the intel guys I worked with use those words, high confidence, I walk away saying, we're not seeing all the intel here, but it's got to be pretty damn good for them to come up with this level of confidence, Wolf.
Because in the report, it says all three agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the National Security Agency, it says all three agencies agree with this judgment. CIA and FBI have high confidence in this judgment about Russian involvement. NSA has moderate confidence. Why do you think the NSA, the National Security Administration, which is in charge of electronic intercepts and other information, they have moderate confidence as opposed to the CIA and FBI, which have high confidence?
Well, let's step through this, Wolf. One of the critical elements of any intelligence assessment, and I'm going to judge this conversation took place in Trump Tower today, is distinguishing between what you think and what you know. We have two pieces of intelligence here. Number one, what happened? High confidence, I think, among all agencies, that Russian entities, sometimes working through intermediaries, stole information to affect the election. There is a second piece that sometimes we're mixing in inappropriately. How confident are we that this was approved, authorized by the highest levels of the
hold on a second.
That's much more difficult.
The vice president-elect is outside of Trump Tower.
Transition office. We received an important intelligence briefing from the leaders of our intelligence community. But before I speak to that, let me say the hearts of every American are in Fort Lauderdale tonight. The President-elect and I send our prayers and our thoughts to the victims of this attack, to their families, to the courageous first responders, and to all the citizens of the Fort Lauderdale area. It's a very challenging time, and we just hung up from our latest conversation with Governor Rick Scott. He has briefed the President-elect and myself several times this afternoon, and we're grateful for his leadership and again, that of all the first responders in the Fort Lauderdale area and in Florida. It's a heartbreaking loss of life, and as I said, the hearts of every American are in Fort Lauderdale tonight. We did this afternoon complete an extensive briefing from the leaders of our intelligence community. It was, as the President-elect said, it was a constructive and respectful dialogue. And the President-elect has made it very clear that we're going to take aggressive action in the early days of our new administration to combat cyber attacks and protect the security of the American people from this type of intrusion in the future. But I know the President-elect appreciated the presentation made by the leaders of our intelligence community, and I know the President-elect and I both appreciate the sacrifices that the men and women who serve in our intelligence services around the country and around the world provide in contributing to the safety and security of the American people.
Sorry to interrupt you,
So thank you all very much.
Governor, do you and the President, do you support the intelligence community?
All right, Mike Pence, the vice president-elect, making his statement on the Florida Lauderdale airport attack. 5 people killed, 8 others injured, some of them now fighting for their lives, as well as this new report that concludes that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. We're following a lot of breaking news. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
QuickBooks introduces Jeanette and her new mobile wedding business. At first, getting paid was tough until she got QuickBooks. Now she sends invoices, sees when they've been viewed, and ta-da, paid twice as fast. See how at QuickBooks.com.
12 blades, 11.5 moisture strips, and laser chin detection system.
Hey man, you don't need to pay for all that to get a great shave when you can ride up.
Happening now, breaking news, mass shooting, a deadly rampage inside Fort Lauderdale International Airport. At least 5 people are killed, more injured tonight. The gunman is in custody and we're learning new details about it. What was his motive? Running for cover. The gunfire sends people fleeing for their lives, passengers streaming onto the tarmac, and the chaos multiplying with reports of additional shooters. How did the evacuation spiral out of control? Putin's preference. Also breaking, the declassified intelligence report on election-related cyber attacks is released, stating Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election with a clear preference for Donald Trump. What tactics did Russia use besides hacking and witch hunt? Trump blasts the focus on Russia's election hacking as political persecution, blaming adversaries he says are embarrassed by their election loss. Later, Trump calls his intelligence briefing on the subject constructive. Will he accept the findings? We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following 2 major breaking stories this hour, including a deadly shooting rampage in Florida. Gunmen opened fire in a baggage claim area at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport, killing 5 people, injuring 8 more, triggering a chaotic evacuation that saw hundreds of people fleeing onto the airport tarmac. The suspected shooter is in custody tonight. Sources identify him as Esteban Santiago, a former soldier in the Alaska National Guard. We're also told he was on an arriving flight and retrieved the gun from his checked luggage. Also breaking right now, the release of the intelligence report on Russian cyber meddling in the U.S. presidential race. It concludes that President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign aimed at hurting Hillary Clinton, helping Donald Trump, and undermining public faith in the U.S. democratic process. Trump was briefed on the report today, hours after he called the focus on Russian hacking, and I'm quoting him now, a witch hunt. We're covering that much more this hour with our guests. Our correspondents are also standing by, and expert analysts as well. Let's begin with the deadly shooting rampage at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. CNN's Sarah Ganem is working the story for us. Sarah, we're learning more tonight. Update our viewers.
That's right, Wolf. Police identifying the shooter as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, saying he opened fire moments after landing at the airport, the rampage killing 5 people, injuring 8 more, and sending hundreds running for cover.
The bloody scene unfolded shortly before 1 this afternoon, as passengers were collecting their luggage at Fort Lauderdale Airport's Terminal 2. Sources tell CNN the shooter, Esteban Santiago, coldly moved through the crowd, opening fire. Panicked passengers were seen running onto the tarmac, escaping the chaos inside. Planes landing at the airport were held on the runway.
We're currently having a building evacuation at Terminal 2.
Ambulances raced to the scene, evacuating victims. Sources say Esteban had landed in Fort Lauderdale moments earlier on a flight from Alaska. CNN has learned he had legally checked at least 1 gun into his luggage. When his bag arrived, sources say he went into the bathroom, pulled out the gun, and came out shooting. When police arrived, they say he was arrested without incident.
We have the shooter in custody. He's unharmed. Hasn't fired any shots. The subject is being interviewed by a team of FBI agents and Broward Sheriff's Office homicide detectives.
Then, as police worked to clear the scene and let passengers back into the airport, more chaos as reports spread of possible shooters in 2 other terminals, leading to more confusion and fear.
Everyone is kind of panicked right now. Everyone ran in different directions.
Tonight, police say Santiago was the only shooter and that police never opened fire.
Wolf, I spoke briefly to one victim who had been on a different flight coming from Atlanta and was there in the baggage claim area when the shooting happened. He said some of the victims were on his flight. He said a laptop in his backpack, and we can show that to you. That laptop had taken a bullet. He and others are being interviewed as we speak by the FBI about what they saw, Wolf.
Santiago arrived on a Delta flight himself. We earlier mistakenly reported it was Air Canada. It was not Air Canada. It was a Delta flight from Alaska to Fort Lauderdale. All right, thanks very much, Sarah Ganem, for that. We're learning new information about the suspected gunman. Our justice correspondent, Evan Perez, has that for us. Evan, what are you hearing from your sources?
Well, Wolf, one of the big questions that we have right now is the motivation of this suspect, and we're getting a little bit of a picture of what the last couple of months was like for him. We know from talking to law enforcement officials that he went to the FBI office in Anchorage, Alaska, a couple months ago. Apparently he said that he was hearing voices, including hearing voices telling him to join ISIS. There was some concern about his mental health at that point, Wolf, and apparently local authorities were called and they took him to a hospital for a mental evaluation. He voluntarily checked himself in to that hospital, and we don't know much more about what kind of treatment he may have gotten during the time that he was being checked out there at that hospital. We did talk to a security company in Anchorage where he was employed. We talked to the owners there. Both owners have told us now that they've been talking to law enforcement. They didn't want to comment any further. We're told, Wolf, that his employers were among the people who heard him talking about hearing these voices. It's important to note that at this point, despite this report about him hearing voices and about him saying that he was hearing voices telling him to join ISIS, that there's no indication of terrorism. We're told by law enforcement officials at this point they're not treating it as a terrorism case. Right now, they're still trying to figure out all the possible different motivations that could come into play here, including, Wolf, the reports from several witnesses on this aircraft that he came in on earlier today that said that there might have been some kind of altercation. Now, we don't know on which leg of the flight. We're told that this is a flight from Alaska that may have stopped, I believe, in Minneapolis before landing in Fort Lauderdale earlier today. That is something that we're checking into as well. But according to witnesses who have now been interviewed by, they describe some kind of altercation that may have happened. Now, it appears whatever altercation happened, it wasn't major enough for security to meet the aircraft when it landed in Fort Lauderdale. There was no incident at all when he landed. Once he arrived, he went down to the luggage area, then the lower level there at the Fort Lauderdale airport. He retrieved his bags, went to the bathroom, retrieved the gun, and then he opened fire, Wolf.
We're getting more information, Evan, on this suspect, Esteban Santiago from the Alaska National Guard. Let me update our viewers what they're telling us right now, that he joined the Puerto Rico National Guard back on December 14th. He was then deployed for almost a year to Iraq with the Puerto Rico National Guard from April 2010 to February 2011. He was in the U.S. Army Reserves prior to joining the Alaska Army National Guard. He received a general discharge. That's not an honorable discharge, a general discharge from the Alaska Army National Guard on August 16th, 2016. The explanation was unsatisfactory performance. He was a combat engineer during his service in the military. When he was discharged, his military rank was E3, private first class. So it does give us a little bit more information on this individual, Esteban Santiago, Evan.
We're told that, he's been interviewed by the FBI, by the Broward Sheriff's Office down there in Fort Lauderdale, and some of what he's saying doesn't check out. For example, he initially told the investigators that he came from Canada, which may have led to some assumptions there by the local officials that he came in on this Air Canada flight. Air Canada flies into that very same terminal. We now know that he did not come in on Air Canada. We also know that he indicated that he was a member of the National Guard and then just simply stopped showing up. That's again something that he has told investigators, and that may explain why he had this discharge from the Alaska National Guard that is not honorable. It's simply just a general discharge because he may have stopped showing up, and that's the reason why they decided to separate from him.
Unsatisfactory performance. As a result, he got a general discharge from the Alaska Army National Guard in August of last year. Evan, thanks very much. Evan Perez reporting for us. So let's get some more on all of this. The Florida Governor, Rick Scott, is joining us on the phone right now. Governor, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, Wolf. This is just a despicable, evil act. Think about these innocent people who come in on a flight. According to law enforcement, we've lost 5 lives here. We have people in our hospitals fighting for their life. This is something that nobody in Florida is going to tolerate, and we will do everything we can to hold whoever's responsible for this to the full extent of the law. This is just a disgusting act by whoever did this.
Well, we know the suspect was arrested, apprehended, Esteban Santiago. Based on everything you know right now, Governor, and you obviously know a lot more than we do, is it one individual who did this, or were others potentially involved?
According to the Sheriff's Department in Broward County, there was one shooter, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I'm still at the airport being briefed by law enforcement. They are... there's a crime scene here. They've shut down the airport. They're going through every piece of the airport to find out exactly what happened. They're talking to everybody. But this is just a despicable act on innocent people. I've reached out all day. I came over here. I landed about I heard from President-elect Trump right away and Vice President-elect Pence right away. I've kept them informed. I've talked to the sheriff's departments around the state where we have major airports, our National Guard, make sure they're ready. My focus is accountable and keep people safe.
What else can you tell us about this suspect, Esteban Santiago, Governor?
Well, it'll come out there. I mean, we're in the middle of an investigation, and it'll come out as they confirm the information. Right now, it's the middle of an investigation. Everybody's working well together. The Sheriff's Department, the FBI, Department of Law Enforcement, everybody's working together to make sure we find out exactly what happened, who was accountable, and then we'll hold them accountable.
You got to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Do you know anything about a potential motive?
Right now, I don't know. There's an ongoing. Today I announced that I'm going to put more money in our budget for counterterrorism in intelligence efforts. And so, it's very important that all of us understand what happened. Now, we're doing everything we can to take care of the displaced passengers. We've got resources available for them. They can go to floridadisaster.org /info. But we're going to do everything we can to take care of them. I'm going to continue to pray for the individuals in the hospital that we don't lose another life here.
Would you characterize this, Governor, as a terrorist attack? 5 people were killed, 8 people injured, and as you point out, some of them now fighting for their lives in Fort Lauderdale hospitals.
Well, I think what we know so far, Wolf, is this is clearly an evil act. This is it's despicable. People just flying, and being murdered by this shooter. It's despicable. This stuff is going on. I'm going to do everything I can to keep everybody safe that comes to our state, and I'm not going to tolerate any of this. And I'm going to do everything I can to hold whoever was responsible. There's an investigation going on, but whoever was, we're going to hold them accountable.
Do you believe, Governor, that airports in Florida, and as we know, those airports are huge, a lot of tourists coming in, a lot of Floridians using those airports, but actually airports around the country as well need to rethink how they approach security, specifically at baggage claim?
Wolf, I reached out to all the major airports in the state today and the sheriff's departments in each of those counties just to make sure they had all the resources they needed. The way you do this is we're going to find out what happened here. We'll figure this out, and then if something else needs to be done, we will do it. We're Florida's at a 45-year low in our crime rate. We look at what's happened, and we figure out how to improve constantly.
Where does the investigation, Governor? Where does the investigation go from here?
Well, right now, I'm sitting right outside the terminal where the shooting was. They're interviewing people. I remember the Pulse attack. They went through. They'll understand. They'll talk to everybody they can. They'll know where every bullet went. They'll know everything about this. The FBI, the Sheriff's Department, the FBI does a very thorough job of trying to figure out what happened there. So right now, we're going to find out what happened. I know law enforcement will, is committed to provide information as they're able to, but they don't want to do anything that would impact their investigation.
I know you got to run, Governor. The airport, I take it, is still shut down.
Yeah, right now, Wolf, the airport is shut down. they're sweeping the entire airport. So determining where the shooting was is clearly going to take a while. It's a crime scene, right? So it's going to take a while before it reopens.
Governor Rick Scott of Florida, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck.
All right, thank you, Wolf.
The Fort Lauderdale airport is, as we said, shut down right now. I want to bring in Tom Fuentes, our CNN senior law enforcement analyst, former assistant director of the FBI. Is there more that needs to be done? Should this individual, Santiago, should he have been on a no-fly list, for example? If the FBI, he went to the FBI in Alaska a few months ago and said he was hearing voices in his head. They were obviously worried about him. They took some steps. But he got on a plane with a gun and ammunition in his check bag.
If someone goes into a law enforcement office, whether it's the FBI or state and local police, this happens almost on a daily basis. Even when I was a cop, every day somebody comes in, makes wild statements, and the authorities think they have mental problems. Now, they can try to refer him to a mental institution, but they can't track him the rest of his life to see that he gets treatment or that he gets cured or that he's continuously monitored. And so then the next step is they're not in a position to deny somebody unless they're judged mentally ill in a formal process. If that doesn't happen, they're not going to be able to keep them from obtaining a weapon. And in this case, it sounds like because he was in the National Guard, he may have already had it all along before anybody had any idea that he was mentally ill. So there's only so much that any law enforcement agency is going to do if someone expresses some degree of mental illness. They just can't lock them up based on that and keep them locked up forever.
But at what point does the FBI say, you know what, there are serious concerns about an individual, he should be on the no-fly list?
Well, I don't think as far as the no-fly list, he has to express some type of terrorist rhetoric or something that he's going to join. But, many people will come in and say things like that they want to be a member of a terrorist group or that they are. And if they're more convinced that he's mentally ill as opposed to serious about it. And even now, we don't know that he's a terrorist yet.
No, we're just learning more about him, including the general discharge from the Alaska National Guard back in August of this past year. The Fort Lauderdale airport, once again, it's shut down as this investigation unfolds. I want to go there. CNN's Boris Sanchez is on the scene for us. A very chaotic scene over the past few hours. Even though they said it was one individual shooter, there was a lot of panic going on in the hours that followed.
Wolf, there were a few moments where we had no idea what was going on, and even I got behind a column because I wasn't sure what people were running from. There were hundreds of people seemingly running in all directions. I'll get to that in a sec, but first I just want to update you on the situation here at Fort Lauderdale International Airport. There's a Broward County Sheriff's Office helicopter that's been circling us for several hours. We are still on lockdown here. There are several hundred travelers that have been stranded here. They have nowhere to go because there's no way in or out of this airport. We've spoken to several people who were out on the tarmac and were terrified in the melee that we saw this afternoon. Several people also evacuated from this parking structure next to me in that panic, the fear of that second shooter. It all started just down from where we're standing right now at Terminal 2. There were several dozen people huddled around law enforcement, and at one point several law enforcement officers that were heavily armed started running across the street here into one of those parking garages. At that point, we heard screaming, we heard people running. They moved into this parking garage. They started going floor by floor and scanning it. That was all happening behind us. On the other side in Terminal 1, then we started hearing screams and seeing people running from there. At one point on the lower level, there's actually a ledge here where we watched folks on the lower level being evacuated out by law enforcement. They were yelling at us to even get out of the way because we were seemingly too close to what was going on. At one point this afternoon, there were hundreds of people standing on the runway, many of them screaming and crying. At one point, they were moved to to an area essentially on the other side of the airport. Eventually, they were able to move on. But as I said before, we are on lockdown here. There are still several hundred people that are not able to leave as this investigation unfolds. It will be some time, Wolf, before they're able to go home and we get a clear picture of what unfolded here.
Yeah, very worrisome development indeed. Boris Sanchez, thank you very much. Joining us on the phone right now is the mayor of Broward County, Barbara Sharif. Mayor, thanks very much for joining us. I wonder if you can update us with any more information you might have about the suspect or his motivations.
Okay, at this time, Wolf, there has not been any updates in terms of what the motivation of the suspect is. What I can tell you is that there has been quite a bit of information that has been given out, and law enforcement right now is really concerned about misinformation, particularly with the identification of the suspect. They are re-verifying that because at this point in time, there are some things about that that are not checking out.
Like what? For example, we want to be as accurate as possible. Mayor, tell us what the problems are.
In terms of the name itself, that may not be the appropriate or accurate information.
Really?
And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to identify and confirm that yes, that is in fact the person that they do have in custody. I can tell you that he was taken alive. He is not injured. He did surrender to the personnel that was on scene during the shooting.
So in other words, he may have had identification, some sort of ID, identifying him as Esteban Santiago, formerly a member of the Alaska Army National Guard, but it may have been a false ID. He may actually be someone else. Is that what I'm hearing from you, Mayor?
Correct.
And do they have
we don't want to continue to give that information out, and so we would like to just clarify that point.
So in other words, what I hear you saying is we no longer should refer to Esteban Santiago. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying right now is we can't confirm that for sure, and so I'm not going to confirm that at this time.
And so, all right, so we will obviously be precise as possible right now. Can you update us on any information, the Mayor, you have on the status of the 8 individuals who were injured? Because the governor said some of them are fighting for their lives.
Yes, so we have, at this point in time, there was a total of 13 people injured during the attack, and 6 of those people were transferred to area hospitals. Out of those 8 people, their injuries are varying in severity, and so I can't give out any information at this time about those individuals, specifically because some of the family members have not been notified as of yet, and some cannot be contacted as of yet.
How long will the airport, do you believe, Mayor, be shut down?
This airport may be shut down into the night. Right now, they have swept the airport. They have moved all the passengers that were in the different terminals to the safety areas as protocol dictates. And what we're trying to do at this point in time is empty the airport, get the passengers off the tarmac as quickly as possible that need to be exited off of the airplane, and then do a final sweep of the airport, make sure that everything is safe, and then the airport will be reopened. As you know, that's going to take some time, and so we're not looking at opening the airport up at any time in the next couple of hours. It'll be a while.
All right, Mayor, thanks. Good luck over there. Barbara Sharif is the mayor of Broward County, where that Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport is located. Much more on the breaking news right after a quick break.
Do you tell yourself, today's the day, I'm going to lose the weight, but nothing changes? Well, today's the day. Just call Nutrisystem.
I'm Brian, and I've lost 75 pounds on Nutrisystem. I'm Chris, and I lost 120 pounds on Nutrisystem.
Lose 15 pounds and 7 inches overall in your first month. Lose weight fast. Money back guarantee.
I got to eat my favorite food. I got to eat, and I got to eat a lot.
Nutrisystem for Men is the real deal, with real food that gets real results. Order your 28-day program right now and get all new Nutri-Crush bars to crush cravings free, and 1 week of turbo shakes to bust that gut free.
Nutrisystem just gave me my life back.
These guys are just like you. They made the call and they got the results. Lose weight, boost energy, improve your health with Nutrisystem for Men. Call or go online in the next 2 minutes and we'll throw in FedEx shipping free. Lose 15 pounds and 7 inches overall in your first month. Make the call now.
Go online or call 877-385-SIZE right now and get Nutrisystem for Men with bars and shakes free. Brought to you by Smart Mouth.
Mouthwash brands want you to believe that bad breath comes from germs alone. But trying to freshen breath by just killing germs isn't effective. Within an hour, those germs start coming back. Science proves that beating bad breath means beating sulfur gas. Here's your proof. My student here used typical mouthwash about an hour ago. Now let's use mint by breathometer to test for smelly sulfur gas. And look at that. Sulfur's off the charts. Smart Mouth Activated Mouthwash is clinically proven to neutralize smelly sulfur gas and keep it from coming back for 12 hours with each rinse. Smart Mouth works because you activate it, releasing zinc ions that actually block sulfur gas. The sulfur gas is gone, even 12 hours later. If you want truly clean breath for 24 hours, you cause a bad breath. Sulfur. For that, you need to use Smart Mouth Activated Mouthwash.
Look for our new dry mouth formula at Walmart.
If any of us were directly faced with a hungry child crying out for help, we would do whatever it takes to help that child. We would, because it's what our hearts tell us to do. And we would because we know it just isn't right for any child to suffer like this. But many children, they face the unbearable feeling of hunger and disease every day. Visit this website or call this number now to join the U.S. Fund for UNICEF with your $15 monthly donation. It's only 50 cents a day. And by joining, I can tell you, you'll start saving children's lives immediately. UNICEF is on the ground and ready to deliver emergency medical care, nutrition, and vaccines on your behalf when you sign up today. I know as a parent that it's heartbreaking to see a child suffer. It just isn't right. And if you agree, then this is your chance to help that child. Please help that child today. Pick up the phone or go online now.
Closed captioning brought to you by InventHelp. Call 1-888-909-4332.
People ask me all the time, George, what do I do with my idea for a new product? I tell them, call my friends at InventHelp.
Call for free information.
We're following two major breaking stories right now. In a little bit, we'll have more on the release of the U.S. intelligence agency's declassified version of their report on Russia's election cyber attacks. Also breaking, the mass shooting at Florida's Fort Lauderdale airport leaves 5 people dead, 8 people injured. It happened in the baggage claim area of one of the airport's terminals. Sources tell CNN the attacker was on an arriving flight, and the gun was actually checked in his bag, his checked bag, the ammunition as well. The sheriff says the attacker is unharmed and was arrested without incident. The suspect does have a military background. Let's bring in our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, update our viewers on what we're learning about this guy.
Well, Wolf, a short time ago, the Pentagon released a service record, a military service record for a man with the name Esteban Santiago Ruiz. This matches the name of the person that, by all accounts, civilian law enforcement in Florida has in custody now. And this service record has some very interesting details in it. This man was a member of the Puerto Rico National Guard and the Alaska National Guard, and he did have a combat deployment to Iraq, deployed from April 2010 to February 2011. Now, you will recall this was eventually, there was the wind down in Iraq, but this was still during some of the very heavy periods of combat. And during that time, he engaged in military activities that resulted in him getting a couple of very significant medals. He got the Iraq Campaign Medal with a star. That means he was in a combat environment. He was also awarded a Service Combat Action Badge as a driver and mechanic. So here's the obvious question that we don't know the answer to. He was in a position to be driving a wheeled vehicle during combat activity in Iraq. Could he have been blown up? Could he have been in a IED explosion? Could he have suffered traumatic brain injury? Could he have suffered post-traumatic stress? These are some of the obvious questions of any service member that might have been in that kind of combat environment in Iraq back during those years. We do not know the answer. That information, that medical information, not likely to be publicly released, but it certainly is an interesting question about this man. He doesn't show that he got a Purple Heart, so it doesn't show that he was ever wounded. But during those years, those who were in some of these explosive events, IED explosions, didn't always get Purple Hearts. People standing nearby might not have gotten a Purple Heart for a traditional activity in which they would have been wounded. So it's just something to consider. He served during these years of a great deal of military activity in Iraq. He is a combat veteran. Still, all the pieces being put together, the Pentagon releasing the bare bones of his military record. But right now we're being told the FBI really, of course, has taken this over, and the Pentagon does not expect a lot more to say about any of this.
Wolf, by the way, Barbara, these are live pictures, the left part of the screen, armored police. You see them walking outside, just outside the airport there. This is still a very tense situation. Barbara, we've also been told he received what's called a general discharge last August from the Alaska Army National Guard for unsatisfactory performance, not an honorable discharge. Tell us about that.
Well, a general discharge for many military people is considered quite serious. It would have indicated that during whatever final period of time he was serving in the Guard, he was not performing to standard. Sometimes this is done because people may briefly go AWOL. They may not report for duty as expected. They may not meet disciplinary or performance standards. There's any number of reasons for it. It can actually have quite an impact on your ability to find employment down the road, on your ability to really, shall we say, integrate back into civilian life. To be clear, we don't know about this man. We don't know what he was facing. We don't really know confirmed what his issues were and why he got a general discharge. But make no mistake, it's a very serious matter. Most people get honorable discharges. It doesn't indicate that he ever faced criminal activity. He did not get a dishonorable discharge by any information that we have here tonight. But a general discharge, let's be clear, it's not a great situation for any soldier to be facing.
You're absolutely right, Barbara. Thank you very much. And I know we're going to be learning a lot more about Esteban Santiago in the hours ahead. I want to bring in our aviation correspondent, Renee Marsh, who's also working the story for us. So what are you finding out, Renee, specifically whether or not this could happen at baggage claim at other airports around the country, where it's outside the security perimeter?
That's right. I mean, we talk about this all the time when we see these sort of incidents, not just happen here, but overseas. This is the so-called soft target area of the airport. And if you talk to any law enforcement official, they will tell you it's almost impossible to eliminate vulnerabilities or a threat and get that down to zero. So he took advantage of that vulnerability within the airport, the baggage claim. As we've been reporting, he did legally, as it appears now, based on the information that we have that weapon inside of his checked luggage. He also had the ammunition. That is perfectly fine if you follow very specific procedures. And at this point, it appears as if he did. You have to have it in a special case, a hard side case. You cannot have the ammunition actually in the firearm. That needs to be separated. And you also need to check in with the ticket counter. So it seems like he followed all of those steps until, well, as we know how this all unfolded when he arrived in Fort Lauderdale.
Evan Perez, you've been reporting he did show up sometime last year at an FBI office in Alaska saying he was hearing voices in his head.
Right, and I think that does raise some very important questions that I think law enforcement is going to have to answer over the next few weeks as they try to do this investigation, which is he shows up at the FBI Anchorage office and he says that he's hearing voices. He exhibits signs of having some kind of mental illness situation. They call the local authorities and they take him to the local hospital. and he admits himself. He essentially checks himself in for a mental health evaluation. The question is, why does that allow him to still have a firearm weapons permit? You know, that allows him to take this firearm on this aircraft. I mean, is there something that should have been done there that would have made him prohibited from being able to carry a firearm, again, inside his checked bags? Perhaps it's his military background, I'm not sure, that might have allowed him to do that. I think that's going to have to be something that they'll have to check out.
Do we know what he was telling the FBI voices, what those voices were saying?
Right, we do know. We according to officials we've been talking to, Wolf, they say that he was hearing voices, including voices telling him to join ISIS. Now, the FBI is also checking this out to see whether or not there was something that they could have done. They're going to go back and check to see what kind of interaction there was with the Anchorage office there in the FBI to see whether or not something more that could have been done. Again, when you're facing someone with a mental health situation, it's really unclear what the FBI should do in that case. It's not clear that necessarily he's done anything beyond just saying these words. I will say one other thing. I mean, with regard to the discharge, we're told the authorities, the initial investigation has shown that at some point he stopped showing up with the National Guard, at the Alaska National Guard. And so that perhaps might explain why he got this general discharge, why they finally separated from him in August of 2016. Again, there's still a lot more investigation to be done, but I think some very important questions are beginning to emerge, including about the mental health issue, about the ability to carry this gun after having reported, after checking himself in for this mental health evaluation. Is that something that should have been forwarded some kind of a national screening center so that perhaps he couldn't board this aircraft with this gun?
You know, Michael Weiss is with us as well. Michael, an individual with an Army record, a general discharge from the Alaska Army National Guard, shows up at the FBI offices in Alaska, and he says he's hearing voices in his head from ISIS, if you will. And then obviously we know what happened today: a mass shooting, a mass killing at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. This is extremely worrisome.
It is, but look, if he's an ISIS terrorist, why is he going to the FBI and saying, I'm hearing voices in my head telling me to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? I mean, if this guy had heard voices in his head telling him he was Jesus Christ, we'd be sitting here saying he was a crazy person. I've argued before to you, Wolf, and elsewhere, that it's not mutually exclusive. You can be an Islamic terrorist and a bit off or mentally ill. In fact, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, ISIS's predecessor organization, used to lure mentally disabled, handicapped people into becoming suicide bombers. There's something in the air now when it comes to ISIS and, frankly, everything else to do with international politics, that people are driven to these ultra-violent, extremist, and totalist ideologies, even if they don't know the first thing about them. And, you want to commit an act of mass murder, you need a banner, you need a cause to make yourself greater than the act itself. So it could well be that this guy just said this. But look, it's early in the investigation. Let's see what the FBI and others find on his laptop, if there's any kind of recruitment material, radicalization, videos of Anwar al-Awlaki, and so on and so forth. But nothing that I'm hearing makes me think this is a dispositive ISIS attack.
He was taken alive, Tom Fuentes. Clearly wasn't, quote, a martyr ready to commit suicide on behalf of ISIS. He's still alive right now. He wasn't even harmed in the course of this after he shot and killed all those people and injured so many others. He was arrested by local law enforcement. I assume the FBI offices, the FBI in Alaska right now, they're going to do a major postmortem. What did they miss? What should they have done when this guy shows up at their offices in Alaska, says, I'm hearing from ISIS to be recruited. I want to join ISIS. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, he shows up at the Fort Lauderdale airport with loaded weapons and kills all these people.
Well, if the Bureau, as the reporting says, if they referred him to state or local police, that's the procedure. The FBI doesn't get involved in individual citizens who might have mental problems.
The FBI doesn't put people on watch lists or no-fly lists or don't allow people.
Imagine the civil rights groups in this country if the FBI locked people up because they said they're mentally ill.
You can put them on a list.
Well, okay, but doesn't necessarily stop it. And the thing about the list still comes back to what was he adjudged? So he's turned over to local police. They get him to commit himself and go in an institution, but he can check himself out any time, and that's the rule of the law. In the United States, most states, mentally ill people can go in, but they can check themselves out as soon as they want to. and there's no way to force it. Then he's been a member of 2 National Guards. He served in Iraq, so we don't know when he obtained the weapon. Could be years ago. And we don't know what happened when he went in the mental health facility. You have to be adjudged mentally ill, again, by a judge, before they can institute the next acts, whether it's no-fly list or no purchasing of weapons. We saw this in the Virginia Tech shooting, where the shooter there had actually been adjudged mentally ill, and nobody notified law enforcement, nobody notified anybody, and he was able to buy 2 guns in a Roanoke gun shop. So this whole issue of mental health in this country has been disgraceful for years, and it still is.
And
we have people amongst us
in these types of situations.
We have a combination of a large number of mentally ill people who are free, and over 300 million guns in this country, which many times they can get access to. It's a lethal combination when the two come together.
It's important to add also that from what we're learning from talking to law enforcement officials, there is no other indication that he had any kind of radicalization, any kind of extremism. He was not on any radar for the FBI. So even though he shows up and he says these things, the judgment of the agents who were talking to him and even the people around him who had brought him there apparently was that he was having mental health issues. And so that might have influenced the way how this was handled at the time. Again, they're going to go back and take a look at it. But I think Tom raises a great point about the fact that mental health keeps coming up in these types of situations. We don't know exactly how to deal with it. And we certainly don't know when these records need to become other than private records, whether they need to be reported to something else so that they can be put on some kind of national database so that people maybe can't fly with weapons and so on. Again, that's something that's going to have to.
And to your point, I mean, if he didn't have a background, if he was not on the FBI's radar, you really cannot just add his name to the no-fly list because then you have civil liberty issues and things of that sort. So there is
privacy rights, and they certainly have their Second Amendment rights. They have the right to own firearms unless they've been adjudicated, as Tom points out, by a judge that they've been mentally defective. That's the way the law reads.
All excellent points, but I assume there's going to be a major postmortem right now to look back, see what might have been missed, what might have to be changed. I'm sure they're going to do a full review, the FBI and everyone else for that matter. 5 people are dead, 8 people in hospitals right now. Some of them, according to the Florida Governor, Rick Scott, fighting for their lives. More on the breaking news right after this.
The IRS announced delayed refunds till February. So how can you get up to $1,300 today? At Jackson Hewitt, you can get an express refund advance, a 0% APR loan. Can't get that online. Visit Jackson Hewitt and you could get up to $1,300 today.
Today I practiced karate. Today I hopped. I rode my bike. Today I played dress up. I hugged my mom.
These things may not seem like a big deal to you,
But at Shriners Hospitals for Children, we call them everyday miracles. Hop! Breaking boards. Hopping. Playing dress up. Riding my bike. Hugging my mom. Every day for over 90 years, Shriners Hospitals for Children has been giving kids just like me the life-changing medical care we need, regardless of a family's ability to pay.
but we can't do it without you. Will you call and send your love to the rescue for only 63 cents a day?
Because of people like you, Shriners Hospitals for Children is able to make everyday miracles happen for kids like me.
And me.
And me. And me. And me.
Just $19 a month is all it takes to give an everyday miracle today.
Your gift, no matter how small, can help a child today.
When you call today, we will send you this adorable Love to the Rescue blanket as a thank you and a reminder of how you are helping a kid like me.
Because of you, we see miracles like these happen every day.
Thank you for giving. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your gift, no matter how small, can help a kid like me. You can help create an everyday miracle today. $19 a month from people like you. Let Shriners Hospitals for Children help kids like me.
Because of you, we see lives changed every day.
Please call or go online now.
Because everybody,
Everyone could use a miracle. Please call or go online now. If operators are busy, please call again or give right away at loveshiners.org. Your call says you care.
Occasional constipation interfering with the moments that matter? Colace can help. Colace softens stool to gently relieve occasional constipation, so you don't have to miss your moment. Use Colace, the #1 doctor-recommended stool softener brand for effective, dependable relief. Colace, don't miss your moments.
Finding a relationship can be like finding a needle in a haystack. With Elite Singles, you can be sure to meet university-educated professionals, all looking for serious relationships. Ditch the haystack. Register today at EliteSingles.com. I really like this hotel room, and I'd like to book it. With Trivago, I can book it here. And it's also good to know that if I book it here, lowest price for this hotel room. Hotel Trivago.
A CNN town hall event. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders takes questions from a live studio audience as Donald Trump prepares to take office. Join host Chris Cuomo of Bernie Sanders Town Hall Live, Monday night, 9 Eastern.
Hey, older brother, you deserve ultra-fast unlimited internet.
I do.
Remember how you wore those cool shoes and someone said, hey, cool shoes?
Yes.
You deserve to upload and download things fast for that. Then there was that time you said the answer and the teacher said, that's right, student.
Yeah, sounds like me.
You deserve fast internet for that too. Also, you're your parents' favorite child.
I'm their favorite child.
Apparently not.
Come on. Not cool.
Now, fellas, when an area of savings mixes with a system of selection, what you get is the
Following breaking news, the shooting rampage at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport that left 5 people dead, 8 people wounded. Just now in a taping with ABC News, President Obama spoke about the attack and whether there may be any connection to terrorism. Listen to this.
That shooting down in Fort Lauderdale this afternoon, do we know enough now to know whether it was an act of terror?
As a general rule, until I've got all the information, Georgia, I don't want to comment on it other than just to say how heartbroken we are for the families who've been affected. These kinds of tragedies have happened too often during the 8 years that I've been president. The pain, the grief, the shock that they must be going through is enormous. I've asked my staff to reach out to the mayor down there and make sure that coordination between state and local officials is what it should be. But I think we'll find out over the next 24 hours exactly how this happened and what motivated this individual.
The president also he reacted to the attack at the Fort Lauderdale airport, but we're also following another breaking story, the release of the intelligence report on Russian cyber meddling in the U.S. presidential election. U.S. intelligence has concluded that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign, that's what they call it, aimed at hurting Hillary Clinton and helping Donald Trump. Let's go to our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, the report says this was all part of Putin's ongoing effort, in part to undermine U.S. democracy.
No question. The real headline here is not that Russia was behind this attack. That's something that they determined with confidence months ago, but to deliver in detail their assessment that the intention of Russia was to weaken Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump win the presidential election, a message that the nation's top spies had to sit across from Donald Trump today in his classified briefing and deliver to him directly. Tonight, a declassified version of the intelligence community's report on Russian hacking concluded that, quote, Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. The Russians' assault on the U.S. election used several different techniques, blending, quote, covert intelligence operations such as cyber activity with overt efforts by Russian government agencies, state-funded media, third-party intermediaries, and paid social media users, or trolls. It also says, quote, when it appeared to Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win the election, the Russian influence campaign began to focus more on undermining her future presidency. Following the briefing, the president-elect said in a statement, quote, I had a constructive meeting and conversation with the leaders of the intelligence community this afternoon. I have tremendous respect for the work and service done by the men and women of this community to our great nation. However, Trump made clear he believes the hacks do not taint his election victory. Quote, there was absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election, including the fact that there was no tampering whatsoever with voting machines. The intelligence assessment confirmed that hacking was, quote, not involved in vote tallying. However, in his statement, Trump never specifically acknowledged that Russia was behind the hacks, despite the clear intelligence assessment and overwhelming bipartisan agreement on Russia's involvement.
I think that's the one thing in the statement that he should have acknowledged. Republican or a Democrat, we are not going to tolerate a country like Russia trying to interfere in our election process.
Another key finding of this report is that these Russian cyber ops targeted not just the Democratic Party, but also the Republican Party. It made that clear. And yet the releases largely targeted just one candidate, the Democrat Hillary Clinton. And Wolf, that is one principal reason why the intelligence community has assessed that the intention here was to help Donald Trump. In effect, they targeted both parties, might have stolen material from both parties, but only released it on one. And that's what's led them to the conclusion as to what the intention of this attack was.
Our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, thanks very much. Trump was personally briefed on the report before it was released. Our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, is working that part of the story for us. Jim, you're getting new information about that briefing with the highest ranking U.S. intelligence officials. What are you learning?
That's right, Wolf. I just got off the phone with a senior transition official who is familiar with what went on in that meeting between Donald Trump and those intelligence community officials who were here at Trump Tower earlier today. I was told by this official that this meeting was not contentious. There was no yelling going on. It was cordial, as it was described to me. But there are a couple of key highlights that I think we want to point out to our viewers, Wolf. According to the senior transition official, they did talk about this issue of the FBI going to the DNC and saying to the Democratic National Committee that your computer servers have been hacked. And there was a conversation that went on during this meeting, Wolf, where it was asked, why didn't the DNC act soon enough? And had they acted sooner, might that made a difference? And according to the senior transition official, the acknowledgement was from the intelligence community officials that, yes, perhaps it might have made a difference. A couple of other things that came up during this meeting, Wolf, according to the senior transition official, the intelligence community leaders who were at this meeting told Donald Trump that the cyber hacking activity began in late 2015, early 2016. And so the question that they had inside the transition is, well, if it began in late 2015, early 2016, how is there this motive to help Donald Trump get elected president? Now, there is an acknowledgement, Wolf, inside the transition now after this meeting, because they say they did receive new information at this meeting that they did not have before, that there was an intent through this hacking activity to harm and damage Hillary Clinton's candidacy. They are not disputing that, according to the senior transition official, but they do still dispute this notion that Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin, and the Russians were involved in hacking to get Donald Trump elected. They say that if you look at the evidence, there was no hacking of election tallies and so forth, but there is an acknowledgement, Wolf, inside this transition team that there was an intent to harm Hillary Clinton's candidacy, Wolf.
Jim Acosta outside Trump Tower in New York City, thank you very much. Let's get some more on all of this. Former Republican Congressman Jack Kingston, a senior advisor to the Trump campaign, is joining us. Congressman, thanks very much.
Thank you, Wolf.
So I assume you've gone through this declassified report. Your bottom line, do you assess what the U.S. intelligence community has concluded that the Russians were trying to help to bolster Donald Trump and undermine Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think the FBI and the CIA are on the same page that there was Russian interference and Russia was coordinating it from the top levels. But I also say the NSA, as you know, and you pointed out earlier today, only had a moderate level of confidence on that. But what was clear that there was no effect of the results because of this, no tampering of machines, and no motive that was found and so forth. So I think that the good part about this report and today's action and the hearings this week is that maybe we can get beyond the politics and say, okay, what do we do about this? Because we know Russia isn't alone. There's lone actors, there's China, there's other nations who are always trying to hack into our computer systems. What can we do about that? And then, you know, one other question, if we're going to continue on, and we as a community of maybe critics in Washington, D.C., where was the president? If this was going on in 2015, 2016, why did the president wait till this fall to talk to Putin about it? And even when he did talk to Putin about it, he said, you guys need to cut that out. Those were his words. It seems to me like it would have been a much bigger deal for the president of the United States and would have merited him sitting down with Putin and saying, what the heck are you guys doing? And if you are going to continue doing this, we're going to get very, very involved. And it seems like that would have been happening as well.
That is a fair criticism that even some Democrats like Adam Schiff, Dianne Feinstein have leveled against the president, that he waited too long to go ahead and launch these sanctions and to punish Russia for these cyber attacks. But I just want to get your personal understanding. Do you agree with this line from this report? We further assess that Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would accept that. But, you know, again, now that we have this report, can we get beyond the political side of it and say, you know, what are we going to do about it from this point forward? And in that respect, Donald Trump called for a 90-day action plan. He's going to put Dan Coates, he's going to put Mike Pompeo, General Flynn, everybody to task immediately to come back with what are we going to do about this? How do we prevent it in the future from other nations and again, sole actors who are out there? I think that the president has acted in a very responsible, the president-elect has acted in a very responsible manner. And he also, by the way, as you know, complimented the intelligence community. So I think he wants to get the kind of the public debate over with, and let's move to a constructive solution. How do you learn from this, and what can we do going forward?
There's more reaction from President Obama in this new interview with George Stephanopoulos with ABC News. Listen to this.
Vladimir Putin got what he wanted.
Well, look, I think that what is true is that the Russians intended to meddle, and they meddled. I'll be honest with you, George, one of the things that I am concerned about is the degree to which we've seen a lot of commentary lately where there are Republicans or pundits or cable commentators who seem to have more confidence in Vladimir Putin than fellow Americans because those fellow Americans are Democrats. That cannot be.
Does that include the president-elect?
Well, what I will say is that, and I said this right after the election, we have to remind ourselves we're on the same team. Vladimir Putin's not on our team.
Back to that, Congressman.
I would agree with him. We are all on the same team, and Vladimir Putin and people who would hack into American elections are not on our team. And I think that, again, moving forward and looking at the president's 90-day deadline for coming up with solutions, I think that's a positive thing. And it might be something also where the White House, the current president's team, could sit down with the president-elect's team and say, okay, let's get off of the public debate. Let's go off to Camp David or wherever we need to be sequestered and come up with some solutions. Because as you know, Peter King is very, very well-respected intelligence leader in Congress. He's very, very concerned that the leaks to the press came from the CIA director. We don't want that either. And so to me, that's a question that's caused some wounds as well.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Jim Sciutto, button this up for us, because I've gone through this report now a couple times. You have as well, and there's a ton of information here, including cutouts or third-party individuals used by the Russians to provide this information to WikiLeaks.
That's right. So the two big headlines here. Russia wanted to help Trump win the election and weaken Hillary Clinton. One. Two, they hacked both parties, Republicans and Democrats, released information targeting just one party. Finally, they showed some of the goods as to why they believe that, including the middlemen that Russia used after stealing the material to get it out in the public eye.
It was also very, very interesting, the fake news, the propaganda that they got out there, very successful.
Absolutely. They make it clear this is a comprehensive campaign, not just hack documents, but also, in effect, hack American news media to some degree, hack in quotes, but get out fake information as well.
And it would be on the internet and get a lot of exposure, all these false stories. All right, thanks very much, Jim Sciutto, for that. That's it for me. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Aaron Burnett out front starts right